Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal. It is Friday, September 9th, 2022, and this is a bonus show decided to do tonight, partly because of the way Wednesday's show ended, where I didn't get to review a story that I wanted to talk about. So, as you all know by now, probably my normal schedule now is Sunday through Thursday, but again, I do enjoy these shows and didn't require any extra research, so I thought this would be fun to do tonight. So this is another part of the uh, book review H.P. Lovecraft, The Complete Fiction series, and I'll be covering one story because it's a longer one. Excuse me, and that is Herbert West, The Reanimator. Or I think it's just Reanimator. Anyway, it is a short story, and but a longer short story. It was actually released in parts in a magazine. Apparently that was owned by a friend of Lovecraft's. So, and I didn't know this when I first read it, so it was kind of confusing because it would go over certain things. It would repeat certain things at the beginning of each section. So, but and also I apologize if you hear my heater. The nights have started to get cooler to where I kind of need that on now. So, but I think that covers everything. Thank you all for listening. Whether you make it to the live stream, which I don't blame anyone if they don't get to make it to the live stream tonight, or if you listen to the podcast or YouTube feeds. Always appreciate it. You can find all episodes of the podcast at salcidoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions, or if you have stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others that you trust. Happy to either read those or have you join me on the show to talk about them. And I believe that covers everything. So I can get to the story here. So let me check on everything. Everything looks okay. So, okay. All right. So this story is, let's see here. Just make sure here. Yes, Herbert West, Reanimator, and I listened to this in audio form in the audiobook version of H.P. Lovecraft, The Complete Fiction. So, and there'll be a good probably 4 or 5 or 6 more parts, maybe even more than that, to this series of reviews on this book, because it's huge. So, but getting back to this review here, so this story, as I mentioned, it was originally released in parts, or as the article says, it was serialized in a magazine, and so, but the story here, it starts with a narrator. I don't believe it says his name, but this narrator talks about his history with the title character of the story, who recently disappeared. He talks about how he was a medical student at Miskatonic University, which is where a lot of Lovecraft stories. It's a location that is featured in a lot of Lovecraft stories. And so the narrator learns about West's theories, his ideas, and they suggest that the human body is simply a complex organic machine that can be restarted, and and that is done through basically a chemical concoction, mixture of different things. And West eventually figures out that he needs to experiment on human subjects. So the narrator and West take different medical supplies from the school to set up a lab in an abandoned farmhouse. And at first, and this is a horror story. At first, they pay some people to rob graves for them. Lovely. But then when none of the experiments at first are successful, and so West and the narrator end up going after robbing graves themselves in order to retrieve more or less decomposed remains, basically. The idea West has is that the deceased must be very much recently deceased, as close to that as possible. And so one night they take the corpse of a construction worker who died that morning in an accident, and they take the corpse back to the farmhouse and put West's chemicals or serum into this body. And so, but nothing happens. So they go into the other room of the farmhouse to continue their work on other things. And while they're in this other room, they hear a terrible scream from the room that contains the corpse. And so they end up running away, fleeing the home. And West accidentally sets the place on fire after tripping over a lantern while on the way out of the house. And so the two escape, but the next day the newspaper reports that a grave in a potter's field was torn apart the night before, and basically by what appeared to be the claws of a beast. So basically something worked with their experiment somehow. So that's the first part of the story. Let me just check on everything in the chat. But yeah, no problem. Thank you for being here. So, and yeah, I was just thinking about that as well. Potter's Field. That's where basically those that don't have any family, I believe, and people that can't afford it, their families can't afford even to have them bury themselves. That's where the local authorities put remains of people. So, so that's what a Potter's Field basically is. Maybe, yeah. Okay, cemetery for the poor. Thank you, APOC. And so that's the first part of that story. And let me see here. Okay, I think I found lost my place, but I think I found it. So, West continues to work on this research, and but eventually, the dean of the medical school, Alan Halsey, I think is his last name, Halsey. We can just say Alan, just because it's a little bit easier. Refuses to allow West access to more human cadavers or the university's dissection lab. And but West continues his experiments as much as he can, and there's around this time in the story, there is a terrible typhoid epidemic that breaks out, and of course, because of this, West and the narrator are called to help tend to many victims that are dying, which is unfortunately perfect for West because he starts injecting the remains, the corpses of these people just after they pass away, with different versions of his serum, which, um, of course, that doesn't really work, except that it does cause the eyes of on certain bodies to open. And eventually, Ellen also catches typhoid, and um, kind of in a way, in a sort of revenge, um, West, and also the really respect. Apparently, the article says here. I don't know. It seemed like more like revenge to me. But West took the corpse to reanimate it, and West brought West and the narrator brought Ellen's body back to their room at a boarding house, where they inject it with a new serum. And he Alan does actually come back to some sort of life, but he is apparently less intelligent and more violent than what happened has happened with their previous experiments. And this reanimated man ends up attacking and beating West and the narrator, knocking them unconscious. And Alan ends up going on a killing spree, um, murdering over a dozen people until he is eventually caught by the police and committed to a local mental institution. And so West thinks that what had happened was Alan's brain had begun to fall apart. Basically, there had been too much time between when he had passed and when the injection was, Alan was injected. So the story continues here. Again, these are all parts of a story, so there are spaces of time in between where nothing major happens. And in the space between that last part and this one, West and the narrator go into practice together in a small town in New England, getting a house near the local cemetery. And of course, that is to have easy access to corpses. And they continue their experiments, but they don't. There is no more success, even in terrible terms, the way they had it before with the other people that were somewhat brought back to life. But then they eventually do get someone that comes back to life, and it's it was a former boxing champion who died of a head wound in an illegal street fight. And of course, since this was illegal, the people that set up this fight brought the remains to West to dispose of the body, just so they wouldn't be caught by the local authorities. And so the two scientists take the body to the lab and put another version of the serum. It keeps changing for each individual, and West says it has to, because it has to be different for each individual, depending on a number of variables there. But nothing happens, so they take the corpse out to a meadow and bury it there. But then some days later, there are reports of basically another person going missing. And it turns out the father of this person believes that West is responsible because West couldn't save this missing person, who apparently was found dead, I believe. That part's kind of vague. But So that night, West and the narrator hear an aggressive pounding on the back door of their home, and West and the narrator come face to face with the boxer that had passed, and so the boxer has been turned into a monster, basically a cannibalistic monster, and West, upon seeing this, because there's actual evidence of this, and West ends up killing this creature. Basically, it's not even a person anymore, by shooting him several times with a revolver. So this story keeps on getting worse and worse, of course, because it is a horror story. And let's see here, 3 more parts to go, so we're making progress. This is it's a terrifying story, really, but of course, very well done. So, sometime after this happened, this killing of the boxer, the second killing, the narrator um, comes back home from a vacation to find the perfectly preserved corpse of a man in the house that he shares with West. And West explains that while the narrator is gone, he perfected a kind of embalming fluid that perfectly preserved a corpse as it was at the moment the chemical was injected into the bloodstream, and at the exact moment of death, basically. And so West reveals that the corpse is that of a traveling salesman who had a heart attack during a physical exam. And as the man passed away before West's eyes, because West at this point is still a doctor, West actually takes the corpse and has been waiting for the narrator to return so they can put the serum in the body and bring it back to life. And signs of life start to appear, and when the narrator talks to this figure, this corpse, which is now reanimated, it seems as though it may be intelligent. But just before he passes again, he starts acting out the way he was murdered, and apparently he was murdered by West, and revealed this sort of in a reenactment, a re-experiencing of the way West killed him. So West, of course, is getting to be more and more deranged throughout the story. So 5 years pass, and there's still ongoing experiments, but West and the narrator become involved in World War I. And they do this, of course, not for any good reasons, but in order to get to more corpses. And so West and the narrator join the military of, I believe it was Canada, and they become medics. And at this point, West is trying to include, or trying to isolate parts of the body and reanimate them independently in order to prove that that the body is basically just a machine. And West becomes friend with his commanding officer, who is also a medic, and his last name is Lee. We'll just go with that. It's a long name, and shares his ideas with Lee. And Lee is interested, but Lee ends up being killed in the battlefield when his plane is shot down, and West immediately is able to retrieve retrieve Lee's body, and ends up, again, this is a horror story here, ends up decapitating, removing the head from the body, and tries to just reanimate the body. And it does come back to life somewhat, but it's reliving its last moments of life. And at the same time, in basically a vat or container that holds is designed to hold biological materials, and is also where Lee's head was placed. The head starts shouting from within this vat, and at that moment, a bombshell from the war ends up hitting that building. And West and the narrator survive, but there's no sign of Lee, of any part of him. And the narrator and West, believe that Lee was vaporized in the blast, although West apparently it starts to talk about a headless doctor with the power of reanimation. So basically, he tries to pass everything off on this guy that had just been killed. So let's see here. On the last part here, a year after coming back from the war, West has moved into a house that is directly connected to an ancient system of catacombs from settler times. Settler times. I can't say settler. Anyway, and while looking at the newspaper one night, West finds an article talking about a series of strange and odd events that don't make any sense involving a riot in an insane asylum. And apparently a figure who appeared to have a wax version of a head, who turns out to be Lee, followed by a group of disturbing looking followers, it says, carrying a box, demanded that the cannibal killer, this reanimated Lee, be released to them. And of course, the asylum refused. And so these people, or what appear to be people, free Lee's. I lost my spot. They basically force their way through and get what they want, which is this remains of Lee. And so then eventually this group of people make their way to West's location, and they have a large box, which of course the narrator and West are told to incinerate it, and they carry it to the basement and burn it. And as soon as the box is burned, the zombies, which is what these people have become, invade this place. I believe this. So I messed that part up. It was no. See, I didn't mess it up. Okay. So even though these creatures are after West, they're not after the narrator. So they end up going after West and killing him. And then, of course, Lee, who is using this fake head now, ends up doing the same thing to West that West did to Lee, removing the head. And of course, then this entire group of zombies, or reanimated people that are not quite what they were, end up leaving, and of course the police are called with all the noise and everything, and all that is left is the narrator, who they don't believe. They think he's either insane or hiding things, and that's where that story ends. So, really wild story. Um, I don't know. It is quite the story, but yeah. So really amazing story there. Just written so much better than I was able to describe it, and even with the beginning of each section, kind of reviewing things again, it was still an amazing, uh, great work of horror. I mean, so definitely recommend again this any of Lovecraft's work. Um, the Complete Fiction is a really good book so far. I've really enjoyed. Seems weird to say almost, but I've enjoyed this book, and I've enjoyed reviewing it with everyone. So, or for everyone. So I think that does it for tonight. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back on Sunday with true paranormal stories from the web. So until then, I will talk to y'all later on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal. Thank you.